softwares out there. So this is about Finland changing to OpenID Connect. And talking points will come later. This is me, and there's the contact information if you want to connect in Twitter or LinkedIn, please do so, and also my email. But that's enough about me. That's the most boring subject in the world. Maybe just about my background. Right now I'm working.
Petteri, this is Torsten speaking. We still see the first slide, and it's not in presentation mode. So I suspect you are sharing not the presentation. I know what I'm talking about. Happened to me as well. So.
Oh man. Okay, I'm not going to switch to the presentation mode anymore because it's going to be yeah. Let's do it like that. Yeah. So that's me.
That's
the organization that I'm working for. Yeah, that's me. And the contact information. The organization that I'm working for is the National Cybersecurity Center, which is part of the larger agency called Finnish Transport and Communications Agency. And our team is responsible for supervision of IdPs and strong authentication and trust services in Finland. And I'm part of the that team as a senior specialist, concentrating mostly on the technical side of things and not to the legislation. So talking points. I'm trying to be quite brief so that we have time for Q&A because I'm not going to be able to attend the rest of the workshop because I'm on holiday currently, and I have to start driving back home after this talk. But first, brief history so that you guys can understand what's been happening here and why things are the way they are. Some stuff about regulatory framework, and believe me, it also has connections and relations to protocols that we are using. And brief talk about or discussion about how we moved from legacy to OpenID Connect and what lessons we actually learned during that time. So the history starts in the 90s when the banks invented their own authentication framework. This predates any SAMLs or anything related to that. So this was really early on development, and it started with banks issuing identities, strong identities, to their customers in the Nordic way. So it's been going on for more than 2 decades. So we had the one-time password list already quite a few years ago, and then they decided or figured out that it would be nice to be able to sell this service to third-party services, other services that needed stronger authentication than just username and password. And it really started to be widely used in 2003 when this tunnistus.fi service was launched. It was a service where a citizen could authenticate to 3 major government online services. That was the employment and social security and tax services. And it was really widely used and helped these government agencies to really go for the digital processes instead of brick and mortar or face-to-face processes. And then in 2009, we had our first own law concerning strong authentication, but nothing really happened at that time. But we established some rules on how to do these things, and well, things went the way they went, and like I said, not much happened. Then 2014, IdPs came along and changed things quite a bit, and we introduced our own national legislation that basically scrapped the 2009 legislation with quite a lot of new things. And one of the most important things in this context that we are talking about here was the Trust Federation Network. So in many countries you have federation networks, but not so many countries do regulation on those, and we do. And this is sometimes quite a big surprise to, for example, international companies trying to establish themselves in the Finnish markets, offering strong authentication services or federation services. And 2018, we added also the regulation that is local. So our agency is responsible for that regulation. And it mandated some things that I'm going to be talking briefly on later on. And the thing the important thing is here that 2019, the protocol that was used and created by the banks in the early days, that was insufficient, insecure, and so on and so forth. The cutout date was 2019, and that's when things really started to happen. This is kind of just a brief note, so that IDPs is the driving regulation law on strong authentication and trust services is the local one, and then underneath that is the M72 regulation that defines some of the issues that are discussed in the national law into much more detailed, let's say, requirements. So we have these regulatory things going on, and they do have quite a bit of things to do with the how things are organized and what stakeholders can and have to do in order to provide strong authentication services in Finland. And we do supervise these. So all LOA substantial and high identity services in Finland are supervised by Traficom and our team. And that means that you can't just come here and start federating bank IDs or mobile MNO IDs authentication out of the blue. What you have to do is to give us a notification that you want to start these kind of things, especially for level substantial and high. And with that notification, you have to provide an audit report, and the audit assessment criteria is there in the link. It's a 160 pages long on how you can assess the security of the system that you provide or the service that you provide. That means that backend services, front-end services, protocols, authenticators, cipher suits even, they are all included in this one. So it's a quite comprehensive assessment on how to prove to us that you're worthy. So after we get the notification and the audit report, we assess the results, and if everything checks out, you are good to go, and you can start your business in delivering either identities or federation services, or as we call them, brokering services. And how did this Trust Federation network change things is quite radical. So previously we had IdPs that were issuing identities, and they were strong identities, meaning that the registration process was strong. So there were face-to-face checks and identity documents that needed to be shown, and so on and so forth. And the 10 banks and 3 MNOs and 1 government service all provide these kind of let's say credentials to their customers. And if you were a relying party or an application or a service provider, goes by many names anyway, the online service, if you wanted to have strong authentication for your customers, you needed to create technical integration to each and every bank, and also have a commercial agreement with each and every bank. So that was 10 integration and 10 commercial agreements. And even in that kind of scenario, we had hundreds of relying parties doing this. But it was, first of all, it was hindering the, let's say, medium-sized online services to adopt these kind of strong authentication services because it was just too difficult, and also very time-consuming and cumbersome for the big ones. For the mobile side, it was a bit more easier because they do roaming within themselves, and so if you get one contract and one technical integration, one mobile network operator, you were able to get all three major mobile network operator identities within that. So that was the scenario before, and the gray area on the right hand side is that we supervise these stakeholders. So IdPs, meaning 10 banks and MNOs and the government service, and the Trust Federation network and the legislation actually introduced a concept called a broker into the picture. And currently, as of, let's say, this year, if you have a online service, what you need to do is to basically acquire the services from one broker, and you can get then the all IdPs and MNOs and everything from a single contract and a single technical integration. The previous model used the legacy bank ID protocol, and now when we did the switch, the brokers and almost all IdPs adopted OpenID Connect, and only one IdP opted for a SAML. But the brokers are masking these things from the relying parties and offer only OpenID Connect to their customers. Okay, they do offer SAML as well, especially for one particular large government service, but basically OpenID Connect was the selected protocol. And like I said, the banking protocol was really created early on, and it was fairly out of date in terms of security. And the major thing was that it worked more or less like SAML. So browsers were used to redirect and these kind of things. And if you used a computer that was used by more than one people, your sensitive information was left in the headers of the browsers. So that was not really an optimal solution. So we asked from the banks that can you update the protocol, and they said no, and we said that okay, fine, 2018 you need to stop this. However, because it seemed to be really difficult for them, it was extended to September 2018. And to facilitate this transition, we created a couple of recommendations, both SAML and OpenID Connect. And by the recommendations, I mean that we have the core specs of SAML and OpenID Connect, but we needed to change some of the, for example, recommended to must and these kind of things in the protocol specifications. But they are still recommendations. In our legislation framework, we do not demand a specific protocol, but we do say that it has to be fairly well adopted internationally or recognized internationally and widely used. So you can't just invent a protocol and come to the federation network and say that, hey, well, we are doing this. That won't fly. So in the 2016 scenario, both SAML and OpenID Connect were relevant, but in the end, OpenID Connect won by a fairly large margin. And all was done mainly by the end of 2019. Some of the banks were still doing something that meant that early this year, everything was OpenID Connectized, more or less. It wasn't straightforward, and it took quite a bit of time from the stakeholders. Some of them started early on and they were ready by the September 2019. Some of them were really, I mean, early 2019 they were ready, and some of them were complete in the beginning of 2020. What did we learn from the regulatory perspective is that it's a tricky thing to write a regulation. So for example, in our regulation, that is the lowest one that is maintained and created by our agency, we wrote that you have to use specific cipher suits, for example, in the Trust Federation network. And that meant that, for example, the new ones like Cha-Cha cipher suits cannot be used because of the wording of the regulation. So now we are in the process of renewing that regulation, and we need to be a little bit more careful that we don't end up in a situation where we actually demand something that may not be valid in 3 years' time or so, something like that. And one thing that was really important is to get to participation of the stakeholders. In the beginning, it was really like walking in tar, or really difficult. So in the end, we ended up doing the specifications or recommendations ourselves in the agency, and it was not the optimal solution. But now, when we are renewing both the regulation and also the recommendations, we have much better participation from the stakeholders, because they also realize that they need to be involved much more in the process than before, so that their concerns can be met. So now we actually come to the related stuff that you might want to know. So some findings that these are maybe accumulated during the couple of last year, and the first one is quite recent one, and the SP name is really important. So if you omit the SP name in the OpenID Connect, it opened up a possibility to exploit the Federation network, so to speak. That means that, for example, you can send an SMS message pretending to be a bank or a postal office to a customer's phone with a link, and saying that, for example, there's a package waiting for you, and click this link to review the route, or you have to do something in your online bank or something like that. And then the customer clicks the link, and they are actually redirected to a broker screen. And because the SP name is not transmitted, the customer cannot verify that they are actually accessing the right service, meaning the bank or the post office. And it happened that by exploiting this one, they were able to basically fool a customer to log in to microloan services. And then some of the microloan services only required the first authentication, and then it was possible to well, basically top up the loans, and they managed to do some bad things. Also, because of the fact that we needed to have better security than the previous protocol, we also added that when transferring personal information, you have to do message level encryption. So TLS is not enough in the Federation network. Language coding, that proved to be also kind of difficult. There were some different interpretations on how to code the language in the messages, and it provided some difficulties. And one thing that we noted is that when the stakeholders were creating the API documentation and putting it public, so that when a broker wanted to integrate to their service, the reality didn't match. So it took for some stakeholders quite a bit of time to make things work. Test environments lacking. So if you do these kind of things, make sure that there's a unified way of testing these things. And currently, one broker just commented that in order to get the test IDs so that they can test all the 10 banks, they have to walk the main street and visit each bank and get the valid production ID so that they could do the proper testing. And that was really not an optional. JVKS is also a challenge for us because in the regulation we say that the metadata or similar needs to be securely exchanged, and that's not exactly how JVKS can be or is used. If you, for example, want to automate the adoption of the let's say the Trust Federation network, right now it's not possible. So right now the stakeholders are doing a bit of manual work in order to get the relaying parties and the other infrastructure to talk to each other. So it didn't. I was talking about this in Stuttgart last year, but as of now, it's not yet a problem, but it might become a problem. And maybe in this scenario, the federation protocol that has been created could provide a solution, but we cannot have a centralized federation operator. So that's not really optimal for us. SSO was also something that was seen a little bit difficult, both commercially and, for example, user experience, because when the user logs into a service, for example, tax service or something like that, and then they go to look at the healthcare records, they actually right now have single sign-on, and we have had quite a few reports that there's a security vulnerability in a particular service due to this fact, because people are not used to this SSO experience. But it also requires some capabilities from the solution doing these things, so that you have to manage which services that can be used in an SSO manner and which cannot be used. And what's next? Well, we are now renewing these things, and PUBI is one of the things that we've been looking at, because we need to have a little bit more security than just the let's say core specs, and that's something that we are trying to now figure out. And also the thing that if you do these things and you are doing regulation, we have to try to avoid protocol specific text as much as possible. So that's something that we need to do, but if we need to be specific, we have to then create recommendations for OpenID Connect, and also maybe think about getting them across to the SAML recommendations as well. And the other thing that is also changed is that visuals and other cues that customers can see when they are doing the authentication process need to be harmonized, so that they can look, for example, the service provider that they are authenticating to, and so on and so forth.
I'm sorry, Petteri, we are running out of time.
Yeah, that was it.
Yep.
So yeah, that's it. Any questions quickly?